What happens when spiritual abuse follows you home? That's what we're talking about in today's episode of the Church Disrupted podcast. We're joined by guest Joyce Hindle as she tells her story of experiencing spiritual abuse as a pastor's wife. Not only did she watch and experience spiritual abuse inside the church walls, she had that same spiritual abuse follow her home as well. And we learn a ton from Joyce's story today. This is an incredible conversation, and if you really want to learn more about spiritual abuse and how to recognize it, how to escape from it, how to heal, then this is a fantastic episode for you. Now, also, we want to give you a quick warning. Even though this is an incredible conversation, we get very raw and real about Joyce's story, and some of the elements of her story could be triggering for some of our community. So if that's you, if you hear anything and it's just too difficult, it's a little triggering, we want to give you permission. You can pause at any time, you can walk away, you can come back, you can even skip this episode. But we believe these things need to be shared. Stories like these need to be shared, and more often than not, they're going to help us heal. So if you're ready to hear Joyce's story, let's jump in together to today's episode of the Church Disrupted podcast. All right, guys, welcome back to the Church Disrupted podcast with your host, Jeff Cochran. I'm here today with a couple of brand new guests, not our normal host, but we've got some guests, one that is going to tell their story, and one that's here for support because you know this story really well. But welcome to the podcast, Joyce and Angela.
Thank you.
All right, Joyce, it's so nice to have you here, Angela as well, having you join us. What we're going to talk about today, this is going to be, it's going to be powerful, but it can also be triggering for some people. So I do want to warn you, if you're listening, you've been in any sort of abusive relationship, especially a marriage, dating relationship, you've been involved with a narcissist and a narcissistic relationship that way, there may be some things that trigger you here. If at any point that happens, feel free, pause, come back, or just skip this episode. For others, this is going to really help you maybe to identify some things that are going on in your church or your relationships. And then for plenty of you, this doesn't have anything to do with you right now, but it'll help you to recognize red flags. So, Joyce, you got a powerful story. We talked, I think, right at the beginning of this podcast journey. I think we had an episode or two out. We may have actually talked before the first episode aired. I'm not sure. Oh,
really? Okay.
Yeah. So it's been a while. I don't remember a ton of your story, but I remember when you shared it with me. I said, hey, let's connect again, and let's actually have you on the podcast the next time you're in Tennessee, because you don't live in this area. So you've flown in, you're spending some time with friends, but you've also graced us by giving us some time. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to share my story. I'm a little nervous too, but I'm really excited to share it because I'm hopeful. My goal, the whole goal in my life is just to empower and inspire other women who might be in that situation, because I didn't feel like I had any support at that point in my life. And now it doesn't have to be that way. So I want it to be different for other people. I want them to hear the truth, to hear steps they can take, and to just understand that they can do it.
Well, going through spiritual abuse, narcissistic abuse, dealing with narcissistic behavior of any kind, it's tough.
Yes.
But perhaps the worst part of it is how alone and isolated you often feel. Right. So the more we share our stories, the more we talk about this stuff on the podcast, the more hopefully it empowers people who feel alone to say, hey, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person this has happened to. And if we can help them launch off our shoulders to get to more safe environments quicker, and to heal easier, to heal faster, then that's what we want, as well. So, and Angela, it's great to have you on today because you're actually who connected Joyce and I. I know your husband very well, and he told you about the podcast. Yes. You and Joyce were talking. You said, hey, Jeff's starting this podcast. You should reach out to him. And that was when I got your initial message on social media. It was, hey, a mutual friend has introduced us. So thank you so much for making this happen. You're kind of the brains behind the podcast today.
Well, you're the brains. I just kind of passed it on to Joyce.
But we're also both aligned in just supporting women in difficult situations.
Yeah. Now, if you're listening today, I know a lot of our listeners are men. That doesn't mean this podcast isn't for you. But y'all's passion is very much so for helping women get out of abusive situations. So much of this actually connects with the church as well. We're going to see a lot of the same red flags you see in relationships are red flags that exist in the church world. So let's go ahead. We'll dive right in. Joyce, we'll start just by kind of hearing your story. The abuse that you had to go through, especially the spiritual abuse, because so much of this was really, it was mental, it was spiritual, it was abuse that kind of got into your soul.
Yeah, and I feel like this podcast is for men as well, because I would love for men to filter through this information and just evaluate themselves and say, am I doing some of these practices to my significant other that are headed that direction? Because it doesn't start with one decision to be a narcissist. It starts with 1,000 decisions.
It's never intentional either. No one wakes up one morning and says, I want to be a narcissist today. I want to abuse my family, my wife, my church, my parishioners.
Right.
We've actually got a regular host, and we talked about this on our previous episode, but we got one of our regular hosts that when we talked about gaslighting, he wasn't on that episode. So we watched that episode, and then he called me the next day, and he said, I just listened to the episode on gaslighting, and I realized I've been gaslighting my wife, and I had to apologize, and I need to sit down and talk with you about it because I've been doing it unintentionally as a defense mechanism, right? We've had pastors that have reached out and said, hey, I realize I'm doing some of these things. I don't mean to do this. And when you do that, guys, that's incredible. If you realize any of these kind of behaviors is something you're doing as a pastor or as a person, the best thing we can do is just say, hey, I'm doing that. That's unintentional. Then let's get somebody you can trust to talk about and get some help with that, because I think we've all done these things.
We all have things we need to change.
Yeah. And we all have narcissism inside of us.
We do.
It's when it becomes habitual and you won't let anybody call you on it that it becomes so damaging. So, so tell us a little bit, Joyce, just about your story, because this story is such an intersection of both relational trauma and religious trauma, that we see both the pastor and the husband right at kind of the center of really everything that you went through. Yeah,
which is so egregious that pastors are involved in the same things as anyone else, any other male they can be. So it started, the beginning was we got married when I was 19, very young. We both were living in this rural area, not many people. We got married, went off to college, started living, starting our lives together. At the beginning, he was very controlling. There was some love bombing, but mostly what I noticed was there was this testing, and then, oh, I'm sorry, I'm joking, or, oh, I didn't really mean it that way, or, oh, no, I'm not like that. Or it was this testing, which is a very real thing for people. So I do something, I say something, and then I'm seeing the reaction I get and whether it's okay, can I push it farther or not? And if it's not okay, I was joking, it's no big deal. You'll see this tons in dating relationships, tons with normal men testing the waters to see what they can do or where you're at, because it gives them information. And it can happen with women too, which I think is important to say. I've seen some really narcissistic, females in relationships, but for anybody who's dating or anybody who's thinking about marrying someone, or if you're just checking out a church, again, all of this works. One thing that I've always said that I think is really important for people to connect with, there is truth behind every single joke. There is truth behind every single barb. So even if it's not a lot, and yes, we can joke, but there's always something there, right? So it's important to say, hey, what's actually the truth that's behind that joke? And if those jokes are happening too often, that's a big red flag. Also, if the response when you get frustrated or when something is said or happens that is hurtful to you, if when you say, hey, that was hurtful to me, please don't do that. If the response is, oh, I was just joking, you're too sensitive. Right. Now they blame shifted. Yeah. I'm not taking responsibility for any of this. I'm villainizing you. I'm blame shifting. I'm putting it back on you. Right. So it's one of those things, a red flag that I think we all need to find, from relationships to churches to everything else. When someone says, oh, you're just being too sensitive, they haven't owned any of their part in that. So a person may be being too sensitive, but I also probably was too abrasive. Both can be true at the same time. Right. And so when I'm talking, I know I'm going to be using him, but I don't just mean, like you said, that all men or that just men are narcissists, because there's great people everywhere and there's not so great people everywhere, and it's men and women, it's everyone. So,
Well, narcissism is an equal opportunity pitfall.
yeah.
Like, we all have narcissism in us. It takes daily checking ourselves, what Scripture would say, humbling ourselves before the Lord, picking up our cross daily. Because if we don't, we can all become that way. We can all become infatuated with ourselves in the mirror,
Yeah.
which is where, the idea of narcissism came from.
Right. Proud and arrogance. Yeah. Right. So we finished college. We moved to Tennessee. He got his first job as a youth pastor. We were there for a short time, and we had 2 children there. It was a great time of learning. At that point, really what I noticed with his narcissism was he was stepping it up a notch. Maybe still not too bad, because while I would say he was a narcissist, it wasn't that far of a jump from what I grew up with. A very controlling father, a very my way or the highway, I'm going to rule the roost, very raging father who it was his way. And so I was used to that. So part of it didn't feel off to me. It was a trauma, definitely a trauma bond. So soon after that,
for those that aren't familiar, can you tell them a little bit about what a trauma bond is?
Yeah, so it's just really that I would describe it in elementary terms, that spark of connection that you feel when you are normalizing what you went through in your trauma, because you can feel it from that other person. So, yeah.
So, a lot of those behaviors, they just felt like home to you.
Yeah.
So it's harder to recognize when it is getting stepped up and it's becoming something more.
Exactly. So we had 2 children. We moved to Tennessee. At that point, while he was a youth pastor for a few years, it was a great time, but he soon felt like the Lord is calling me to plant a church in Ohio. So me being the good wife, felt like even though I didn't want that, I had to do that. That was just God's calling on my life, was whatever my husband was doing at the time, and I was willing to follow. And I was very, very soft and very compliant due to nature and nurture.
Yeah.
And so we quickly moved to Ohio.
But nobody ever asked, hey, do you feel called to move? Do you want to move? It was just something that it was positioned, hey, God's calling me to do this. Never ask, and then you didn't feel like it was your responsibility to do anything but support.
I did not feel like I could do anything, or I should do anything besides support. I do remember the head pastor at the time said, hey, would you just take this slow? Would you consider leaving in a year so we can really tee this up great? This up differently, or because they were sending us and they were supporting us temporarily with funds to go there and start a church, get set up, and then they were going to back off on funds. Yeah. And so my husband at the time said, nope, we can't wait. We have to leave now. Yeah. So then we moved to Ohio, and everything seems like it's going great. We're getting set up at the church. We do a church launch. We're both working our hearts out to try to make this church successful. In there somewhere in the first year or 2, I got pregnant for a 3rd child.
Okay.
Which
so a
was
lot of transition in that.
A lot of transition. Every time I had a child, there was no help. Life in general, all the woman's work was everything to do with the kids, everything to do with the house, everything to do with the cars, everything to do with all the support work. So he could literally sit at a coffee shop and grow the church.
Yeah. Well, and if I could speak into that too, because being a pastor, for a long time, I spent almost 2 decades in local church ministry.
Right.
And a lot of this resonates with things that I've seen, things that I've done. The first few moves that we made for ministry, I never asked my wife, hey, do you feel called to move here? It was hey, I feel called to move here. This is what God's calling us to do. So to go against that would almost be going against what God said.
Right.
It took me a while. It wasn't until about our 3rd move that I said, hey, I sense God is saying this, will you pray about it too? Because if he's calling me, he's going to call you.
Right.
And that led to us making a move to Knoxville. And it also led to, after the last church, of us saying, hey, we're going to stay in Knoxville. We're not going to pursue ministry, in the traditional form again. But I say all that just to say, for the pastors that are listening, for the people who are in ministry who are listening, and for just the husbands and wives in general, if God calls you to something, no matter how big what he calls you to is, no matter how passionate you are about what God has called you to, and I totally get that, but no matter how passionate you are about what God has called you to, or how clear it is to you, if he hasn't called your spouse yet, then it's not time, because God will call your spouse too. And we don't have to tell them, hey, this is what God called us to. We don't have to put that pressure on them. We can simply say, hey, this is what I'm sensing. I'm going to pray about it. And if God calls you to it too, then I'll know we're supposed to do this. And until then, it's not the right time. Okay. When it comes to calling and it comes to ministry, it's so easy for us to just kind of bulldoze because God said, but remember, God sent you that spouse. God will call them too. And I tell pastors all the time, if you feel called to do this next thing, but your wife doesn't share that calling, it's not the right time yet. You need to spend time praying about it, walking through that. The other thing that I would say, because I think this is just important for our listeners, I've mentored a lot of young guys over the years, and I've said the same thing. So if you're any of the guys I've mentored over the years, you've heard this and you know this as young husbands. But dads, you are just as much a part of that child's life as the mom is. And that child needs you to be a father, which means being active. So I still remember my wife was a stay-at-home mom, and I was in ministry when we had our kids. And I had seen so much of this that I just wanted to do it differently. It's one of the things I got right, because I just said I've got a lot wrong, including, not even asking if my wife felt called to move in some of these places. But when we had our first child, she was going to stay at home. I knew she was going to be exhausted. I knew that was still a job. I wanted her to raise our children that way. But the kind of, and I won't say it's a deal that we struck because it was just something I wanted to do. I committed that when I was home, if there was a diaper to be changed, I would change every single diaper until he was out of diapers. Yeah. Well, then we had our second child, so we had two in diapers at the same time, and I really rethought that, guys. I'm not going to lie. I rethought that commitment, but I stayed with it. And so for about 5 years, because of both kids, every time there was a diaper available when I was home, I took care of that. But it's something that I teach my kids as well. When you have a child, the dad needs to be just as involved as the mom. Okay, so if as a couple you make that decision, for the wife to be stay-at-home mom, that's okay, or for the husband to be stay-at-home dad. We've got some people doing that now, but both people need to be involved in it. And this is the biggest thing: ministry is not an excuse to neglect your family. Pastor, ministry is never an excuse to neglect your family. Our families are our first ministries. So your spouse, your kids, they are your first ministry. And if you're not ministering well to them, you don't belong in ministry to other people. So it doesn't matter how big of a church we're growing. Doesn't matter how good of things we're doing. Doesn't matter how many people are attending, how many butts and seats, how much money's coming in. If we are not first taking care of our family and ministering to them well, then we've missed it. Because at the end of the day, the ministry that matters most is that your kids respect you, your spouse respects you, the people who know you most and know you closest respect you most. And often it's the other way around. The people who are closest to us say, I see a different side of Pastor Dad. I see a different side of Pastor Mom. So again, pastors, let's lead our families well first. And if we'll do that, we'll actually be better pastors.
And I'll go a step further and say, I think he felt like he's doing God's work, so he can't he can't take out the trash. He shouldn't help with baths. He shouldn't bring the baby in the middle of the night when I'm exhausted or whatever. He didn't do any of that. But I feel like if you're saying you're doing God's work, but you're not doing family work, that is a sin because your family is God's work. It's not separate. It's both.
What's your first ministry? It's the first people you shepherd. And if a pastor, is called to be a shepherd,
if you're too good to take out the trash, you're too good to be in a pulpit.
Well, being a shepherd, think about think about David, right? He was looked down on because being a shepherd was a dirty profession.
Right.
Okay, being a shepherd meant you had to do a lot of the stuff you didn't want to do. You smelled bad, but it was all about protecting the sheep. So David was a shepherd. Now pastors are called to be shepherds. Jesus is the good shepherd, but Jesus also said, if you want to be great, you first got to become last. The first will become last, and the last will become first. So if I'm leading a big ministry, but I'm not willing to take out the trash at home, then I miss the heart of God for ministry, right? It's about my ego. It's not about ministry. So if we ever want to know with a pastor, or if yourself as a church leader, we want to know, am I doing this for the right reasons? Are you still willing to do the little things, the dirty things, the uncomfortable things that no one sees? And if not, if we're only wanting to do the ministry that people see, then we're not really wanting to do ministry. We're wanting to perform. We're wanting attaboys. We're wanting, people to stroke our ego, right? But if you're still willing to put the chairs up and take the chairs down and take out the trash and do all that, then odds are your heart for ministry is still in the right place.
And they say this over and over, but who you are behind closed doors is who you are. Mm-hmm. You even can move all the chairs if you're the pastor, but if you're doing it in front of people just to show them that you're the servant, then it's the wrong motivation.
Yeah, well, if I serve at the church, but I don't serve at home.
Yeah. So somewhere along the line, things continued to get skewed, where in his mind, he was doing God's work, or at least that's what he was saying. Mm-hmm. And all the homework was for me. So we're at the church. Everything is going great. It's growing by leaps and bounds. I'm working part-time and taking care of everything around the house. He is starting to day trade during the day because day trading was just becoming a thing.
And were you working in the church?
He was. So at that point, the church office was in the basement.
Okay.
So she was volunteering.
So I'm volunteering. I'm women's ministry, children's ministry. Sure. I'm wherever I'm needed, and then trying to raise children. Mm-hmm. So at the time also, though, he's getting more and more anxious, more raging, less open to hearing anything. I feel like I'm sinking. There were there's a lot of different layers. The kids were one layer. The church is growing bigger, more things, but also strange events start popping up. So
did the rage kind of come out of nowhere, or was it just kind of slow over time?
It was slow over time. The rage was always there. I was never allowed to be angry or raise my voice or say something direct, but he could rage all day long and react and say something did happen that didn't really happen and not hear my version, or keep me up all night fighting and saying, the sun's not going to go down on our wrath. We got to stay up and hash this out until you say you're sorry.
Yeah, which is like such a good verse, but it gets weaponized into you can't go to bed. You can't go to bed until I win.
At that point, it's spiritual abuse when you're demanding an apology for something that I did not do or did not say. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and that's one of the not triggers. It's one of the signs of a narcissist is sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that for a long time. So yeah, that's even one of the signs. If he's keeping you up all night fighting, or she, you might have a narcissist.
Yeah. So that rage starts coming on, and it's kind of slowly. What did you attribute it to? Did you recognize that something new was going on? Did you think it was just the stress of the seasons? Like, what did you think? Because that...
Yeah, so strangely, at the time, I would have said, oh, no, he handles his stress really well, but he's coming down on me more and more and more, and my box is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. What I can say, what I can do, what I can wear, where I can take the kids, when I can leave, all kinds of strange things like that are going on where my box is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So I'm starting to get depressed and I'm attributing it to my childhood was pretty tough. I know I have trauma. It must be my trauma. And I wasn't putting the whole picture together. It's like every wave that came from him and from his abuse, because there was emotional abuse, mental abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse. There was abuse of every kind. But at that moment, I would have not called it abuse because it was coming in a wave, and I would, that wave would go over me and I'd get back up and be like, okay, that was a rough night. We got to trudge on. We got this church. He doesn't have a salary yet, or the salary is decreasing because the church over here is lowering our salary. And there was just so much going on that I didn't see the ocean for all the waves that were coming in.
Yeah.
I just saw each wave at a time. I'm not
You're just
putting it all
trying to
together.
stand up. You're trying to withstand what's going on, and it sounds like you probably thought that's what he was doing too. This is just a stressful season.
I'm believing at the moment that we're a team. We're for us. And I didn't realize all the things that were going on behind the scenes. We were never a team.
Yeah.
He was very much always out for himself to create his, I don't know, at this point I would say his kingdom, or to be a big fish in a small pond, or to be stroked by people, whatever it was. I'm just assuming. I don't know why he's
easier to
acting
see
like-
on the back end than it is when you're in it.
because you can see the whole picture and you've healed a little bit. But at the moment, I'm just taking each event as this happened and I'm letting it go.
Yeah.
This happened, I'm letting it go. I know things are rough, but I'm not putting all the pieces together.
But it's just a season, and you're in survival mode.
And at that point, you don't know anything about, I don't even know if I ever heard the word narcissism.
Yeah, well, a lot of people
I
have
never even heard of boundaries.
So it's become a really trendy buzzword, and now
Right.
people just label everybody
Everybody.
as a narcissist, which are not. Okay,
Right.
Very few people have narcissistic personality disorder in PD, but narcissism is a spectrum.
Yeah.
So we're all
Yeah.
on the spectrum. It's just where are you at on the
And
spectrum?
we can all make decisions to step in for a
Yeah.
moment and be that way, and then step out,
Exactly.
or
And some of us are more naturally inclined on the narcissism scale, right? So I'm the son of a narcissist.
Yeah.
I've grown up in narcissist environments. It is very easy for me naturally to lean into that, to be a manipulator. It's something I have to be aware of. And I hate even saying that, but if I can't say that, I can't keep it in check.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have
which
to
I
know.
appreciate.
Acknowledging it.
Yes,
Right.
I just have to know that's easy for me. So therefore, I've got a lot of people around me who I'm always saying, hey, help keep me in check. And it's why we try to go to great lengths to be authentic on the podcast, not try to put on a show, because all of those things are, they're the things that can lead you that direction. But I think there's a couple of things you said that I think are important, especially for the listeners. You said it felt like waves. Like it was just, you couldn't see what was going on. You couldn't see the ocean because all you were doing was experiencing those waves. So there's two things that come up from there that I think are really important. For the listeners that don't know, because we don't talk about this all the time. It's been a little while since I think I mentioned it, but my wife is a therapist. So what she says often about grief is she says grief is like an ocean, okay? It hits you in waves. But the farther you get in on the journey of grief, the farther you get into the ocean. And I'm probably butchering this because she says it way better than I do. But she says the farther you get into the ocean, right, and the deeper you get, the less those waves come.
Yeah.
And they're not quite
They
as
don't
high.
knock you down.
No, they just kind of wash over you, and you float with them. And she said, but grief never fully goes away because you'll be fine. It's calm waters for a while, and then a wave just comes. But the difference is, as we navigate grief, and we learn how to walk through the journey, we're not getting knocked over by every wave. But as long as we stay on the shore, and I think about, my kids when they were little, they'd stay like right in the wet sand on the shore because they didn't want to get in because the waves were beating them up.
Right.
We were in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and the waves are
Knocking
beating
them
them up.
down.
And it's, hey guys, if y'all just get in a little farther, it'll calm down and it'll be fun. But for them, it was, why would I go farther into this, right? And that's the thing with grief. We often put off dealing with grief, especially over trauma, because the waves hurt.
Oh yeah.
But the farther
They're
we
knocking
get
you
in,
down like crazy, and that's painful.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's it's kind of embarrassing. I keep
Yeah.
falling in front
Yeah.
of all these people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the beach is never empty when you get knocked over by a wave or your swim trunks get taken off or something like that. So what you're doing is we try to avoid the grief instead of actually processing the grief. But I think it's also important if you're going through grief, and I know so many of our listeners are, whether that's from a religious trauma or any other kind of trauma. If you're going through grief, understand one, it will get better. The waves will knock you down less. The waves will not be as hard. There'll be greater intervals between. But at the same time, it's okay if it's been a long time since your trauma and you still have waves of grief. That's okay. Let that wave come, let it wash over you, and then just keep moving on.
So that's a really good analogy, because I think too, when grief comes, the thing that we need to do is just be with it. So you know how when you're in the ocean and the wave comes, and right before it hits, you just hold your breath and you go, and you go down in the wave, and it doesn't hit you as hard. You just, when you have grief like that, you just have to be with it. even though it's scary,
Yeah.
because that's a lot better than trying to fight it.
You try to fight it, that's when you feel like it's drowning you.
It is, it's knocking you down, it's killing you.
And there's no way to get around the pain. Grief hurts.
Right.
That's what I mean. That
Right.
is the definition of grief. It hurts and it's so painful.
Yeah, yeah.
But we just want you to know, if you're going through grief right now, we're with you. If there's anything that we can do to support you, let us know. I appreciate all of the messages that you guys send us. We cannot get to all of them at this point. So if we haven't answered your message, I want you to know it's not that we're ignoring you, but we try to answer as many of them as we can. And the amount of you who share your stories with us, share your grief with us, it means the world to us. But we want you to know we're praying for you. Even if we don't know your story by detail, or we don't know you by name, we pray for our listeners regularly because we understand that what you're going through, nobody could fully understand it or feel it outside of you, but it matters and you're seen. But the other thing I wanted to say before we move on into that, pastors and high performers, so this isn't just pastors, this is high performers in like business or any other arena, we're really bad at saying, hey, I'm just in a busy season. And when this season's over, everything will calm down. And I'm sorry I'm so stressed. I'm just in a busy season. When this season's over, it'll all be better. And one of the things I've learned, because I'm real easy to call something a season. My wife is real easy to label it with the truth, right? So this is something that I've learned from my wife that I'll share with you guys, right? But for our high performers, our pastors, people who are always in these busy seasons, if it's been more than 3 months, it's not a season.
Yeah.
Right.
First of all, think about summer, winter, spring, fall. If you're in an area where you actually get to experience all 4 seasons, which we do in Tennessee, they're about 3 months, right? If it's more than 3 months, it's not a season, something's going wrong. But if you always find yourself in a stressful season, or your stressful seasons are lasting longer and longer and longer, they're no longer a season. That's become your habit. That's become your reality. So a lot of times we lie to ourselves and we say, this is just a season. Things will be better when I get out of this season. When instead we need to say, this has become a habit. This is an unsustainable way of approaching life, and I've got to do something about it.
That point, it becomes a lifestyle choice, I think, too. You just choose to do that instead of step back and reevaluate, how's this affecting my family?
Exactly.
How's this affecting my health, my wife's health, my children's relationship with their parent?
Yeah.
It's just really a choice at that point if you're going to sustain that season or not.
That's right. And it's really easy for us to call it a season, though, because then it takes the onus off of us.
Oh, yeah.
And like your husband's a great example because he really does, with the type of work he does, there is a 3-month season that it's hell. Okay. It's just, he can't do anything, but he's working all the time.
Right.
I know I'm not going to see him, during
And
those
he's
3
so
months.
good at it, Jeff. At home, he doesn't bring that stress home.
That's awesome.
And I know that stress is there. And a lot of times I'm like, do you need to work Saturday? Or nope.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
What I can leave at the office, I'm going to leave at the office. So he's a good example, I have to say.
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
that.
Well, I love that because I see the other side. So I know he's stressed. I
Right.
know, there's meetings we'll be a part of where I'm like, hey, we're not going to see him, for the next couple of months. That's okay. But when that's over, he's back and he's back into a regular rhythm, and I appreciate that so much that it's, for a lot of the especially the business leaders I work with, the season is the habit.
Right.
But your husband's done a great job of showing that, no, that is a season. I know it's coming, but it's not my normal. And it makes it an even greater example to hear that he's not taking that home, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's just something for us to think about. Again, this is early recognition before these things become something where our behavior's damaging to someone else. Hey, how long has this season been? And is it really a season, or has it just become my lifestyle?
And so what I noticed was that at that point, I noticed that our whole world, our whole marriage revolved around him only. And I didn't even actually mind that. That was what was normal for me because of nurture. But I also realized this is not sustainable. I do have needs. We have 3 children. There's a season for, we just had a baby. There's a season for, I need to go to college. I want to take college classes. And that was always shot down. So I just want to say right here that if you are a pastor's wife who find yourself in a situation where it's getting really bad, go right away and seek help, get a therapist. So because of where I was like, I need therapy. I'm going to jump into therapy. And he was like, absolutely not. You are not jumping into therapy. And I was like, yes, I have to. And then he was like, okay, well, only if I pick your therapist. If I pick your therapist, then you can go. So he's picking a therapist, and I'm like, okay, I'll go. And I start talking to the therapist.
That's such a weird request.
And I'm coming
to pick
home.
your therapist for
and
you.
I'm coming home, and he's like, sit down right now and tell me everything that you just told the therapist. So I'm like, what? This is weird. Okay. But I did it because I was so soft and compliant. And I'm still at that point thinking, we're a team. We can make this work. But I'm also immediately seeing we're having marriage problems. And crazy enough, I wasn't seeing that before. I was just... maybe because I don't know whatever reason, I wasn't seeing that.
Yeah.
But the therapist is immediately calling me out, saying, "You realize what you just told me is mental abuse, is gaslighting, is verbal abuse, is spiritual abuse," and just calling it out. So when
That's why he cared. Let's be real. That's why he wanted to know everything you told the therapist.
So he's getting more and more angry every time I go to the therapist, and finally he's like, the only reason you're going to this therapist is because you're having an affair with him, and you need to go to a different therapist. So he picked another one. So I started going to that one. That guy was a lot softer, didn't tell me the truth as much, but still allowed me to talk out loud and say the things that I needed to say out loud to keep getting it out.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, my husband at the time was getting more and more angry that I was still demanding to go to a therapist. There were different things popping up in our lives also. You know, at one point, a underage girl said he had touched her inappropriately. So then there's a whole church thing.
Is that from the church?
From the church where we're planting. And it's determined, I mean, it was a big, long story, but it's determined that this doesn't seem like it's within his character. We've never really seen anything like that. At this point, we barely have a church board and deacons. We're not under any church.
So there's no external investigation that goes on into
accountability. This. All the people that he was pulling in for leadership were also either very new Christians or very soft people, or he was very skilled at being charismatic.
The people he's pulling into leadership were people he could control.
And he could shade you or me or anyone, and then something else would happen, and he's already got you shaded, so he could make you believe very easily that, hey, these people just need to go. So then he's starting to kind of like get people out of the church that he didn't want there, and putting people in leadership who were brand new Christians, great people, but brand new Christians who had never been through. People
who were going to protect
who trusted him, and who he could show his love bombing side and charismatic side, so they would never believe what he was capable of or what he was even doing at home.
So this young woman, and try to be careful the way we talk about it, because the YouTube and all the algorithms, you say certain words, and they're like, let's not show that.
Sure.
But this girl gets, mistreated,
right?
Gets abused, or she says there's an allegation of that. There's no external investigation.
No.
The internal investigation, the response is, this doesn't seem like our pastor's character, so we assume it's not true. Did that girl get any help whatsoever?
So her parents wanted to handle it the biblical way and come straight to him, when in my mind, this is a legal issue. So I want to make that distinction, that churches are out there holding their pastors to a lower standard than legal standard.
Yeah.
Because they're saying it's the biblical way, and when actually it's the opposite of handling it the biblical way. If it's a legal issue, it's out of your hands.
Well, and if it's Matthew 18,
Yeah.
I when we dealt with spiritual abuse, we dealt with issues with the church that we were at last.
Yeah.
We tried to follow Matthew 18
Yeah.
because Matthew 18 is important. Okay. And that's where I go, hey, directly to the person. If I can't work it out with them, I take a couple of other witnesses. If we still can't work it out, we take it to the church, right? And Matthew 18 is very important. Jesus taught about that. But Matthew 18 should never be used in a situation of abuse.
Amen.
Okay? Especially if we're talking like, any sort of sexual assault, physical abuse, anything like that.
Right.
Matthew 18 goes out the window at that point, because we cannot expect a person who has been abused or mistreated to go directly to their abuser and confront them. Okay, so every church, and this is something that we teach, outside of the podcast, we're starting a brand new nonprofit organization to do church training, to do research into these things. And one of the things we teach every church is you need to have a clear abuse reporting structure.
Yes.
Okay. Where abuse can be reported, and that could be, that could be physical abuse, it could be sexual abuse, it could be mental abuse, spiritual abuse, abuse of power, doesn't matter.
Right.
Any kind of abuse could be reported to a third-party source, or it's reported to someone in the church who has to take it to a third-party source where there's an independent investigation.
Yes.
Those things should never be investigated by people inside the room or inside the church, because that puts everybody in a bad position.
Right.
Okay, you're having to choose, you're having to figure these things out. If it's criminal, it needs to go to the police, right? And it may need to go to a law firm or something like that to do the investigation.
Right.
If it's not criminal, organizations like ours can do that. If it's abuse of power or something else like that, let's find the truth. Let's talk about it. But if there's no way to report it, it's almost always going to get swept under the rug.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So now for me, it's a red flag. If I offend you and you come to me and I say, oh, or you maybe you don't feel comfortable coming to me alone, and you bring another person with you, you bring Angela with you, and I go, oh, you didn't follow Matthew 18. You didn't come to me first by myself. Okay, so that's a red flag to me. Like, if you have the Holy Spirit living in you, you care about people.
That's right.
You don't care about the Matthew 18 process as much as you love people, and you don't die on that hill.
Yeah.
So it's now a red flag to me that all these churches are using, or all these pastors are using Matthew 18 for these church problems, because
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really kind of throws me off guard with Matthew 18 is I've found through hearing a lot of stories from Church Disrupted, from my own experiences, kind of all the way across the board, a lot of the same churches that use Matthew 18 to try to silence someone because they didn't go through the right process. Hey, we can't hear you because you didn't go through Matthew 18. They're the ones that are the least likely to listen or go through Matthew 18 when you try to do it right.
that is my experience.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's criminal at all, if it's abuse of any kind, even if that's not criminal. Matthew 18 doesn't really apply in those situations because a victim is never going to be able to go directly to the person who abused them or the person who victimized them. So that's one of the reasons why we try to teach churches in what we do, especially with this nonprofit that we're starting. We try to teach churches to have a very clear reporting structure so that if there's abuse of any kind, it's going to go somewhere else. It's going to go to, it's going to be reported to someone who is going to report it to an independent firm. You're going to have an independent investigation. And look, if nothing's happened that's, not above board, you're going to be cleared.
Right.
But if something has happened, people are going to find it. But the church leadership should never be involved directly in those investigations. There's just too many opportunities for us to try to cover something up for someone who we love, someone who we believe in. It's very hard for us to admit to ourselves that a pastor or church leader could be doing something that's not above board because we think we know them, right?
Right. And the church is held to a higher standard, not a lower standard.
Yep,
So-
that's right. So a lot of times Matthew 18 is misused.
Right.
All right, it's good.
Yeah.
It's something Jesus taught us about conflict, but it does get misused. It gets abused by itself. But churches, pastors, if you're out there, if you do not have a clear reporting policy where people can report any kind of abuse, including abuse of power, and you don't have a clear policy for how those independent investigations are happening, that's one of the first things I would encourage you to do. Because if there's not a clear process for people reporting, and there's not a process for doing independent investigations, eventually something's going to get covered up. Something that doesn't need to be covered up is going to get covered up. And we want to be above board. We want to keep things in the light. And if we don't have anything to hide, that shouldn't be very scary.
Right.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I found myself feeling very, very alone because we didn't have a church structure where I could go to someone and say, hey, here's what's going on. I was kind of looking for someone that I could go to that I felt safe, where I didn't completely burn this church to the ground, burn our marriage to the ground, and still get help. And I just wanted help. I wanted...
You had your own concerns, but now you've got the, could this be true?
Right.
Of what this young woman said.
Yeah. So then I'm finding myself in a smaller and smaller box, like I said, and more allegations start coming out. At one point, a police officer stops by our house and says, "Hey, where was your car last night?" "Oh, he was in it." "Oh, I didn't know what happened at that point, but he's called out and he was in some neighborhood following lady." And so there's more things coming out.
So he's following someone, stalking someone. They see the car, report it. And it
Stalking
turns out it was your husband. Where did you think he was?
So what he said, which also made sense to me. So I'm still at that point, these are distant, these are like 6 or 8 months apart. Mm-hmm. So he's like, "Oh, we were looking for rental income. I was just driving around the neighborhood, looking for a rental, houses for sale mm-hmm. and a rental to buy." And that made perfect sense to me because we were. Mm-hmm. So he's very skilled at not just lying. He was layers of lying. Yeah, he was skilled at lying a lot. So at this point, he's also day trading away. I find out he day traded away like $10,000. But at the time, I'm thinking, we don't have any savings. We're not even hardly making, so I'm running the bills.
You thought you guys were in a really tight financial situation.
We were, but I'm still trying to save because this is our 401k. This is our, I'm trying to budget. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to do the right thing and run our finances. So he day trades away $10,000.
You didn't even know about it.
And
after.
What he's telling me is, I knew he was day trading, but today I made 500. Oh, today I made 1,000. Today I made 200. He's not telling me.
He's leaving out, I lost 5,000.
Right. Oh, and then when we had 65 cents or whatever, maybe it was $10. We had $10 left. He's like, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And by me saying, okay, so we need to have a conversation about that because we cannot day trade anymore. Mm-hmm. Explosion. I'm making him look stupid. I'm angry. There's an explosion so big at that point that I was scared for my life. So I'm sitting on the stairway.
Was that the first time you had been that fearful?
Probably not. So there were 3 times through this whole process that I literally am sitting on the stairway it's a 2-story. I'm sitting on the stairway. He's in the basement in his office, and I'm holding the phone knowing if I hear his foot on the steps, I'm calling 911 and I'm going to run in one of the kids' rooms and lock the door because he is coming to kill us. He is coming to kill me. And so at that point, I'm like, how do I even get out of this?
Because he had control. From what I'm understanding, he had control of the finances. Your box had been made very small. You couldn't do anything without letting him know what it was. So there was a lot of control, which was going to make it hard for you to get out.
There was a ton of control. At the time, I didn't even have a cell phone. He had just had a cell phone. Cell phones were pretty new. A mother doesn't need a cell phone. And when I did get it, you can have my old one, and I'll get a new one. Mm-hmm. Things like that. So there's control all over the place. What really turned a major corner, that was a huge eye-opener to me, the day trading, where he was doing that and just out and out lying, even though he wouldn't have called it lying. Yeah. Another big turning point was the day I came home and sat me down and said, "Now I need you to tell me everything about your therapy session, what you said to the therapist." I was like, "No, I'm not going to do that."
How did he respond when you gave a hard boundary?
So I said, "You're welcome to come with me. You can hear everything I'm talking about, but I'm not going to repeat anything anymore, ever, never." Mm-hmm. And we were in the basement. He was laying on the couch at the time because we were just talking. Mm-hmm. And he went into a rage. He picked up a huge metal office chair and threw it at me. So I'm racing up the stairway, screaming, grabbing a 1-year-old baby under my arm like a football hold, and screaming to other kids, "Get to the car, get to the car, get to the car." And I'm running up the stairway. And before I could get all the kids corralled and get out the door, he just got to the top of the stairs and said, "Everybody go to their rooms." And they immediately scampered. They went to their rooms. Yeah. I had the baby. I had my car keys in my purse, and I was like, "Oh, shit, I cannot get away. I can't get away safely. Mm-hmm. I cannot get away."
Can't get your kids away either.
I can't get my kids away.
You
I
take
have
one
3.
baby and they have...
Yeah, what am I going to do?
You can't make a quick getaway with young kids.
And now it's physical. It's physical. So he would have said, immediately he was saying, I didn't throw the chair at you. I didn't throw the chair at you.
Just trying to get your attention.
He did throw the chair at me. He did. And if it would have hit me, it could have killed me. So it is physical abuse, even though technically the chair did not hit me.
Well, that's one of the things, though, that when narcissistic abusers turn to physical abuse, and that is usually one of the last places they turn. When it turns to any sort of physical abuse, one of the biggest kind of deflections that they use or excuses that they use is, I wasn't trying to hurt you, I was trying to get your attention. Okay. Literally, I remember sitting in a courtroom with a narcissistic abuser who was close to me, who had hurt a family member who was close to me. As they said, no, those 3 shots that I fired with a firearm through the wall at you, those were just to get your attention. I wasn't trying to hurt you, right? So if you're experiencing that, I just want you to know, if you're hearing those kind of things from about any sort of abuse, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was just trying to get your attention. That is a massive red flag. If you stay, you're probably going to get hurt or worse.
And so that's what I knew. So immediately I was like, I have to get out. I have to get out. So I started talking to girlfriends in the church whose husbands were on the board, who could at least start giving me direction. I reached out to the pastor of the sending church. He was not much help. It is what it is.
Yeah.
I was the woman, I think, in his eyes, and so I was overreacting. So whatever. So I'm getting counseling. Then that incident has happened. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to address real problems, and the whole time he's gaslighting, spinning, minimizing. It's just getting worse.
Nothing's his fault. Nothing needs to change.
Nothing is his fault. It was at the point where just by me asking him, hey, could you take out the trash, when I'm like running circles around the 3 children, because they're at that point, they're like 2, 4, and 6, or, like little kids. There would be an explosion every time. So it was just his way of like, no, you need to not have any needs. You cannot have any needs. I am the only person that is important here. So I knew that if I left, it was blowing up his career. It was maybe burning down the church that we're trying.
You're not just leaving a husband at this point. You're not just breaking a marriage, but like for most pastors, that means the church goes under as well.
Right. And our church was very good about it. When I started talking about it, the church immediately sent us to a 2-week intensive counseling situation where we lived with a therapist for 2 weeks. The only problem with that is Narcissist. This guy was better lying than I was at telling the truth. So when he talked to a therapist, eventually the therapist could see through, but it takes a long time to get there, because a narcissist goes in and they know what you're going to say, because they know what they did. Yeah. And so they start talking over you, they take over, and they tell the key information faster than I could even identify it.
Well, they're good
I'm
performers.
still spinning, because narcissists also keep you off balance. So I'm still spinning. I'm still trying to even verbalize what's going on here. He just threw a chair at me,
full stop. We don't need to explain it. That's not normal behavior.
That is not normal behavior. So then at that point, there's allegations that are coming out from like 6 or 7 other women. So the same thing. So I
now
realized,
it's not just the potential stalking issue. It's not just that one young woman.
Right.
There's 6, 7 allegations coming out all at one time.
And now I'm realizing, while I wasn't connecting the dots, saying, yes, this did happen, I have this whole thing going on at home. I wasn't connecting the dots. I was thinking this is completely separate. But now I'm realizing everything he's doing at home, he's also doing in the church. And he's abusing people, and he's abusing women, and he's lying and cheating and stealing. And
well, at that point, you realize, because for so long you bought into his lies, you bought in the spin, things would make sense. The lies were so good. But when you got to that point to where it sounds like you knew he's lying about you, lying about what happened in front of a therapist, and that's when you realize, wait, if he's lying about these things about me in front of a therapist, could he be lying about all of the other things too?
Right. And it was like a smack in my face. It's like, there's like zero chance that 6 or 7 women will come out and lie about a pastor.
And that all of those accusations are
and this
false.
not also be true. All of it is true. I'm convinced. So I was talking to the church leadership, my girlfriends who were church leadership wives, and I knew that he had to leave so that I could just think. I mean, at that point, when that much is going on, I couldn't even think. You can't even think straight because you're off balance all the time. Living with a narcissist is an energy suck. And you have no energy to even think or get on balance. And I was like, I need him to not be here for a little bit.
And it's not the same, but if you're working with a narcissist, especially in a spiritual religious environment, then when you're at work, it's the same kind of thing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then that's when often, to keep you off balance, when you start seeing things are going on, they'll keep you at work longer. There are bigger projects. There's more to do. So that same MO happens whether it's in relationships or whether it's at work or it's in a church. That's just kind of the narcissist MO to try and, with everything they have, scratch and claw and fighting to keep control.
Yes. And then, so if you're also not 100% for a narcissist, if you're 1% questioning,
you're the enemy.
You are the enemy. So immediately it was this, you are the enemy. You're the problem here. And so the church, long story short, helped me. One day at church, they took him to the side and said, hey, Joyce has something she needs to tell you.
And who did you report to? Like when you finally reported, who did you report to?
So the church board, which was a group of men who were our friends, a group of couples who were our friends, who trusted him, who then found out he's not who he says he is.
Yeah.
And they already knew of financial abuse that he was doing in the church. They knew of all these allegations.
So there were, financial issues within the church as well.
Oh,
Did you know about those?
Yes. So the crazy thing is, during all of this, I could see exactly what was going on. I'm like, I'm not going to be a part of this. So they had very little financial controls because it's a brand new church and they're trusting him. And he's the one setting up all the checks
all the
and
policies,
balances,
procedures,
all the
controls,
policies.
he's writing them.
He's picking the people. So he's swiping the card for his hobbies, for books, for everything he wanted. Our basement is filling up with new computer bags, all kinds of photo equipment that he wanted for church, for the social media at church or whatever you called it at the time. So he's buying all these things, and he's day trading, and he's just list off more things. Everything he's doing, all kinds of things.
So do you think that's why they were willing to listen? Because when the first allegation came forth from that young woman, it was, well, one, they didn't have a relationship with her as much as they had a relationship with him. So there's a greater trust level.
Right.
But also there were no other red flags at that point.
There were no other
trust
red
his character. By the time you reported, there's been multiple allegations from women, but also there's been these financial issues they've had to start dealing with of saying, hey, you need to start bringing receipts. Like we can't justify this, right? So do you think that's why they were willing to listen at that point?
Oh,
because
totally.
there's more red flags.
Oh, totally. Because so I tell, a group of them, like, hey, you need to look at the charges that he's making, because these are not legit. They're not legit, like hardly any of them. He's sitting at restaurants, he's meeting with people, he's going places. I'm finding out weird places he's going that I can't even explain. And I'm like, there's a whole lot going on. I don't even want to know what's going on with the church because I have enough on my own. Yeah. But I'm like, you need to start looking at this because there's abuse of finances. So they start trying to put in place controls, accountability. And they're like, okay, so, just one of the things was, hey, if it's over, I don't remember the amount, I'm making it up. If it's over $50, we want you to bring a receipt so we can see what it was for. Mm-hmm. So the next month they get no receipts and they look at the bills and they say, hey, we asked you to bring receipts. And he's like, oh, like you meant paper receipts. Oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. Did you mean paper receipts? Oh, okay. I'll do receipts. I'm sorry. So then the next month comes along and he's got receipts for $300 and up. And then he goes, oh, oh, wait, did you mean $50? Oh, gosh, I'm so stupid. That was his.
You play the aw gee shucks. It's what I call the aw gee shucks pastor card.
Yeah.
They use it in sermons. They use it when they get, when they get caught. Everybody wants to believe the aw gee shucks pastor.
Right.
But that's usually a deflection when they know something's going on.
He didn't know. So it took them a while to wrap their brain around it, but they're honing in on him more and more and more. And they already know what's going on from what I'm saying, and they believe it.
The sad part about that is I just wonder how many of those other victims, the other 6, 7 women that came through, came forward, how many of them could have been protected, never had to have gone through that. How much could you have been protected from if they had simply investigated the very first allegation and said, hey, until this is proven one way or another, you're on the bench.
Right. Mm-hmm. And what they were scared of is that even that would burn the church to the ground, because this was right at the time when it came out that all the Catholic priests were abusing children. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, oh my gosh, all we need, or I'm guessing they're thinking, oh my gosh, all we need is this to get in the news. And
which is crazy, because why it was so bad in the news was it had been covered up for so long.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, well, let's do the same thing they did. Let's try to cover it up more, and maybe that'll protect us.
So I was begging them almost. So they were doing the best that they could. These were good guys. These were guys like you, like Cliff. They're good guys. They're trying to do the right thing.
They've got other jobs. They're doing other things.
But they also haven't been through anything like this, and they're clouded because he is their friend.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why
he's a good manipulator.
They can't believe he would do this. That's not the version of
and
your
they
husband
totally believe that he's going to change, or what happened. But he also knew like the specific women to pick, that when they said certain things, he immediately could pick out something bad about what he felt was bad about their character that would shade them to other people.
That's an ad hominem argument. You bring something against me and I attack your character. And now that your character comes into question, people have forgotten about the original accusation that was brought.
It's lost. So long story short, I take his suitcase to the church and say, you have got to leave. I don't know. We have to have a physical separation for a little bit. I don't know what that's going to look like.
The church helped you with that.
They helped me so much. A man came over. Somebody came over to my house. They changed all the locks on the doors.
Awesome.
Somebody took him to there was an Airbnb at the time, but there was a hotel or something somewhere that they took him to. That I want to say somebody stayed with him that night to make sure he didn't come back and awesome. Leave and drive to the house.
So
because he would have done that.
Yeah, I try to be fair.
He would have done that.
Yeah, I try to be fair. We picked on him. Hey, this went way too far because you didn't deal with it early, right? And that's valid, because we have to learn from that. Church leaders, we have to learn from that and stop. We can't keep making these same mistakes over and over and over again. But at the same time, I think it's only fair to say it sounds like they did a phenomenal job later on when they did finally respond to you, that they did a phenomenal job of helping you. And if it wasn't for their help, you may not have been able to get out.
Yeah, totally. So they were super helpful with that. There were parts that they did amazing that I've never heard of anybody getting help like this. So they were super, super caring. So literally 48 hours after I kick him out, basically, I realize there is no way ever that I'm going to sleep under the same roof as him. Never. And prior, 2 days previous, I would have said, no, I'll never get divorced. I don't believe in divorce. I need time to think. And immediately I was like, the only thing I can do here is divorce. And I started divorce proceedings within a month.
Well, and that's the thing. When you finally get separated from a narcissistic situation, that little bit of space can be incredibly enlightening. That's why they don't want to give it to you.
It was like coming up out of the water when you're drowning and getting that first breath and being like, ugh.
So I remember...
I can breathe again. I can breathe.
Yeah, and this is totally different. But I remember being in a situation, working in a church, situation was getting, something just didn't feel right about it. I was very well thought of within the church, right? Had a lot of opportunities, but I remember just thinking, something's not right. Go on vacation, and while on vacation, realized as I was away for a week, first vacation I'd had in a while, I've got to go back and set up some boundaries because I can't work like this for forever.
Wow.
And then, of course, I come back and end up getting essentially, secret fired and moved to another spot.
You will have no boundaries.
Yeah, because they realize, oh, he's putting up boundaries, right? But
Wow.
in that week away was so enlightening. Just like when you took some time away, when you didn't have him in the house for 48 hours. So if you're not sure if you're in that narcissistic situation, just take some time. There's nothing wrong with taking a little time away, but that time away, the Holy Spirit can do so much in that of helping you to see what's going on in reality. It may not be as bad as you think. It may be worse than you think.
Right. It may be worse.
You also said that one reason why you knew you need to leave then instead of later, you didn't want your children to learn these behaviors and
Yes.
think that they were good and healthy.
So my 11-year-old son was having tics, and so things were really stressful. Like we were having whatever argument that would start where we're in the car with the children, and he's racing down the highway, and I'm saying, please slow down, please slow down, please slow down. And he is not slowing down. He's going faster. He's swerving. He's dangerous. He's risking our lives. And we would go past, every time we would go past a trailer court, he would say, if you don't stop this, you're going to end up in that trailer court as a single mom with no money. Do you realize that? And it, like the first time he said it, it was like a punch in the gut. I was literally like, it took my breath away. But after he said it like 15 times, at one point, I did yell back at him, I would rather be in that trailer court.
That would be better.
That would be better. And he never said it again. So the more you stand up, the more volatile it can get, but also you're stepping back, you're gaining strength. Just like when you go work out at the gym, you're getting your voice, you're gaining your strength, and you're stepping back from the situation and making it more level. I was leveling the playing field. Like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to keep covering up for you. While we were going through some of the worst stuff, he decides to have a marriage series at church and does what I would call, I mean, I guess maybe I should go back and listen to it. At the time, what I would call was an amazing marriage series that he said all the right things. All the things he wasn't doing at home.
He wasn't living them, but he was
wasn't
preaching
living it. It wasn't in his heart, but he could say it out loud and make it flowery. And so it was amazing.
You're sitting there thinking,
to
if
me.
he did this at home, our marriage would be fantastic.
Yeah, because everybody else is believing, oh my gosh, he's just fabulous. He says all these things. So they get him out, and then I start the divorce process, and then it leads to other problems that you have with a narcissist, because it's not like the narcissist goes away. It's just that the problems become different problems.
Yeah.
So then we have all those problems starting.
And it sounds like as more allegations came out, as it got toward the end, more allegations came out. He's dealing with things on the church front, home front.
Yep.
The more things fractured, the more erratic his behavior got.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's what happens with a narcissist. The more we are actually dealing with these things, the harder it becomes for them to keep the lies out, the lies up.
Right.
But also they start showing who they are, which is why it's important that we actually talk about these things instead of hiding them, instead of trying to protect the person or protect the church, because the sooner we talk about it, the easier it is for us to protect other people, but two, the more we're talking about it, the harder it is for them to keep up that facade, to keep up that lie.
Right. When you shine the light on it, the darkness goes away. So you
Yeah.
have to shine the light on it, as painful as that is. But you cannot be isolated. So I started that process. He did things like break into my house, continue stalking me, all just craziness. It took a year and a half for the divorce to be final. Very difficult to divorce a narcissist, because if you say the sky is blue, the sky is blue, the sky is blue, they say the sky is red. And then at some point they go, oh, yeah, you're right. The sky is blue, or the sky is red, or the sky. I messed that up totally. Whatever you say,
Well, that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, right. I was so off balance. So the court decided every single little thing in our divorce proceedings. It was a circus. It was a few days in court it was depositions. It was all kinds of craziness. It's just as hard to divorce a narcissist as it is to be married to them. It's just different. And so he became a person that I just, again, every time he would do something to hurt me, it was like another wave of like, how is this person who is saying he loves me and wants me back doing this again and again and again? Horrible, terrible things, lying to the court, going around trying to get, telling the kids that I'm trying to get full custody and take them away forever.
It's trying to turn them against you.
Telling my 12-year-old son that I'm sleeping with boyfriends now.
Yeah, well, all that stuff is just to turn them against you.
Right.
And so and again,
they're skilled splitters.
Yeah. Well, we talk a lot about narcissism in the church. And this is a man who, what I thought was, really cool about your story, and we can learn so much from it, was this is a person who was narcissistic and abusive at home and in the church.
Yes.
A lot of narcissistic abusers in the church abuse in the church and are actually great at home because they really get their narcissistic supply, that's called, their narcissistic supply from church. But when we see how it can happen both in a relationship and in the church, it helps just make more sense of it. Because a lot of times when you leave a church, or it's the same thing you talked about earlier, if you're not 100% with me, now you're the enemy.
Right.
Well, that happens to a lot of staff members and congregants at church. I was on the inner circle, and now all of a sudden I disagreed on one thing, and I'm the enemy of all enemies.
Just because you told the truth.
Right, exactly. So you leave the church, you go get another job, or you leave the church, you go to another church, but now they're assassinating your character to anybody that'll listen, and you have people who start saying, hey, do you know what they said about you?
Right.
Right? Do you know the story they're telling about why you left, all these sort of things? The reason that happens, again, is the same reason he was doing it with your children, trying to turn them against you, so that he can maintain support. Well, that's a lot of these narcissistic pastors do as well. We got to turn everybody in the community we can against them to gain more support. And what it oftentimes does is it means people lose their entire community. Just like you in this divorce ran the risk of losing your influence over your kids with all the stuff that he was speaking into them. So because there's such a huge risk, people don't leave those relationships. They don't leave churches because they feel like the risk is greater. Right? The risk of leaving or trying to get help is greater than the risk of staying. And even for you, until the risk of staying got greater than the risk of leaving, it was hard to leave.
And what Angela was alluding to, I realized, my son was having tics, which I read then, why you have that is huge amounts of stress and abuse. And I knew that was going on. I knew that was going on in our home. And my daughter, which was even more concerning, was saying, oh, I know he was yelling and screaming and driving fast, but he didn't mean this. He meant, and she would have some way that she's explaining it in her mind, which was insane to me. And I was like, I cannot let a 9-year-old believe that this is normal and rationalize it like I've been rationalizing.
Because then they'll behave the same way.
She will marry someone exactly like that.
Yeah.
If I stay. So immediately I tried to get a job. He followed, I tried to get a restraining order because he broke into my house. He's following me. The reason why I didn't get the restraining order was because they give you a 30-day, which I'm sure this is typical with abusers, but they give you a 30-day emergency. You get an emergency hearing where they say, yes, you might have a restraining order, but it's a 30-day restraining order. We'll come back and revisit this. Yeah. Well, during that 30-day period, so they let you tell the whole story at some appointed time. I was trying to get ready to tell the whole story of why I was freaked out, scared of him, and thought he was going to we were going to end up on the news as the murder-suicide thing. Yeah. So I'm trying to get a job because I'm like, I'm not staying. I have to get a job. I have to get on my feet. I probably won't be able to keep the house. I'm trying to get legal counsel. I'm trying to line up my life and get away safe. And he follows me to my interview that I'm supposed to have.
Oh, wow. Shows
up at the interview, literally face to face, like from here to this door. And because I wasn't strong enough to say I have to leave the interview, he could go back to the court and lie and say, I was at this place with her and I showed up accidentally and she didn't leave. She wasn't scared. She didn't leave. Well, I'm trying to get a job and he's coming infringing on this, and I wanted the job. I needed the job. And he's literally wiping out my chance of getting a job if I run screaming out of this interview.
And he's still pastoring this whole time?
At that point, he was put on leave.
Okay.
So the church is trying to, behind the scenes, had groups of men that were trying to meet with him it felt like day and night. So a lot of it for me is a blur.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it, I literally said, don't tell me what's going on. I do not care about what's going on in the church. I have to deal with what's going on in my life, and I can't take all of it on. So I knew that they were meeting with him, but then I knew, oh, well, they're trying to create change, and he wouldn't do this and he wouldn't do that. And slowly the men are falling away as time goes by. They're like, okay, there's no hope. I can't keep putting my energy into
they have their own lives as well.
Meeting with you at 5 a.m. every Tuesday morning when you're not doing anything to make this different, and you're not doing what we're asking you to do. And so they're falling away one by one. So eventually he gets fired from the church. The church actually gave me his what do you call it? When he was his severance pay. The church knew he was doing everything he could to just fight against this, and his severance pay they make out to me.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So that I can live and stay in the house for a little bit and get on my feet and get a job.
Well, they struggled to make the right decisions early, but I can't say enough how much how important it was that they made the right decisions later.
Yes.
I don't think if it was outside of the church actually offering you help and listening, I don't know that you would have ever made it out of that situation.
I don't know
just
if I
because
would
we
have
hear so
either.
many of these stories.
Right. I would have left, but I don't know if I would have been alive. Because how do you get someone out that doesn't want to leave?
Yeah. So you end up getting through this process. It was a heinous process, but you get through the divorce process. You move. Your kids are safe. You're safe. Was that the last time he pastored?
No. So I begged them to make this a legal issue because there were 6 or 7 or 8. I don't even remember how many. There were at least 7 or 8 women who made allegations. I wanted them to get this on legal record, even if he wasn't charged.
Just have it on the record.
Have it on the record so that this is a legal thing, not just he said, she said, and they couldn't do that for whatever reason. So he literally went across the street in a rural area and started working at a church literally across the street. And what he had told that group of deacons or board or whoever they had was, hey, I want to get ahead of this. My wife is leaving me. And he said, he told a lot of lies, and this church is trying to destroy me and these people. And he was very good at victimizing himself. And he set it up perfectly so that this board over here, when the church tried to come and say, hey, this is what he's doing, they said, no, we don't want to hear what you have to say. We already know the truth.
Oh yeah. He's already told us what's going on.
He's already told. He's sorry. He's so repentant. I don't know what version of that he said, but something.
Well, and it's really easy. I'll say this. It's really easy for churches and other pastors to buy into that because, you get false accusations, you get things that come your way. A lot of pastors have been betrayed. And because of that, it's easy to believe that someone else is getting betrayed. So, a narcissist is really good at getting in front of the story. So I'll give you an example in the church world. And I keep bringing this back. Guys, here's the reason why I keep bringing this back. We wanted to have this conversation because when you and I talked the first time, it was insane how many times we said the narcissistic behavior in your marriage mirrors the narcissistic behavior in the church. You got to see a little bit of both. But as you heard, like the early podcast episodes we were doing, you said, oh, this mirrors this. We did an early one on gaslighting, and we talked about it, Right. So I guess it was like right after the first podcast came out. But we keep going back to this. There's so many similarities we can learn from. So when we tried to have a Matthew 18 church discipline conversation with the pastor of the church that we left and had so many spiritual abuse issues with, right? They had just fired my wife. We try to talk to them. They refuse. And I remember telling my wife, I said, they have 48 hours. And if in 48 hours they won't talk to us, we're going to release this NDA they've asked us to sign.
Yeah.
And the reason why was because we knew if we did not get ahead of it, the moment they realized we weren't going to sign the NDA, they would assassinate our character.
Right.
So we ended up making a post, and there were some people who got upset. Hey, why'd you put this on social media? We just said, hey, basically she got fired for this reason. Pray for everyone involved, leadership stuff. But they asked us to sign this NDA. We don't think that belongs in churches, so let's not do it. But there were people who got upset even with that fairly nice controlled post that we posted the NDA. But I had to keep telling them, if we didn't post the NDA, I've watched them do this to other people before.
Right.
They will tell a story, and then people's character is completely burned.
Right.
I needed to get in front of it to say, there's no moral failure here. There's no real issue for this. Here's why, she was let go.
Yeah.
And if you think that's a reason why she should be let go, great.
Yeah.
If you think it's ridiculous, that's up to you as well. But here's what happened.
Right.
And then they wanted us to sign an NDA and not talk about it. If your husband could have gotten you to sign an NDA, he would have gotten you to sign an NDA.
Sure.
Right. So
Sure.
Just like he got in front of the story with the board and deacons of this next church, these churches want to get in front of the story with people who might have abuse allegations, right?
Right.
So I think it's just important that we note that just because you've heard a story already does not mean that that's the truth. Okay. Again, we need to hear all sides of the story. And that's why more churches need to have a process where someone can report, because before it goes to any sort of independent investigation, it can go to mediation, where a mediator hears both sides and says, is there anything here?
Is there validity?
Yeah,
Right.
there might be validity on both sides.
Right.
And honestly, with that church, because I'll be honest, if we actually got in the same room, had the conversation with a mediator or separate, there's probably some truth on both sides, right? There's things that could have happened on both sides, but if we don't get in front of it, we know that our character is going to be destroyed. The elders or the board at the previous church didn't get in front of it. So by the time they said, hey, here's what's going on, we already know the story. And since it's not a legal issue, they couldn't prove it.
Right. So what ended up happening years later, he pastored that church for a long time. And at whatever point they realized, I don't remember what denomination it was, but the denomination realized they hadn't ever vetted him. He just came in as the pastor. They
And
said,
did he come in as the senior pastor or work in another role?
So what had happened, he did not come in as the senior pastor. He came there to be support and help, and he ended up ousting the pastor that was there.
Yeah.
He ended up ousting him. And so that's how he kind of got in without any vetting.
He's there for years, and
Yeah.
then the denomination all of a sudden realizes you haven't went through our processes.
They don't have any paperwork on him. So they go to start the process, and they hear some of the things, and he goes, deuces, I'm out. I'm not going to be a pastor anymore. I'm sick of this, people trying to chase me down for things that didn't happen.
So they just tried to get him to go through the denominational process, and even
As I understand it.
yeah, that little bit of accountability, he was ready to leave.
No, he's
Yeah.
like, no, I'm not going through this again. I'll just do something else.
And that's pretty natural with a narcissistic leader. They don't like accountability.
Right. So if there was any type of accountability, which he could see that coming, he's like, no, I'm done here. So we ended up being divorced for as long as we were married now. Every 2 years, he took me to court for custody of the kids, because you can.
Yeah.
The court has to hear it, even though it's bogus. For whatever reason, I'm just assuming to drain my money, to put me through the hassles, to try to traumatize me, and
Gain control.
to gain control, and just harass.
Okay, and your kids are all grown now?
My kids are all grown. The last court case so far has been when my now 23-year-old, my youngest, when she was getting ready to turn 18, 6 months before that was our last court case for him to get custody of her. And at that point, she was refusing to live with him, but he's still going to court to fight.
Well, and again, for narcissistic leaders inside and outside of the church, narcissists want to have control. So they'll do anything to fight for some semblance of control, even if in that situation it doesn't make logical sense.
Right.
They want to fight for that control.
Right.
And again, at times we all have that in us where we want that control. But so you went through a lot. You went through years. Now you've had as many years of somewhat peace as you had of that terror.
I have.
It's up until just really the last 5 years that you've not had to deal with him.
Right.
But this was not just your husband. This was also your pastor. You saw spiritual abuse. You saw abuses of all kinds in the church. You saw that and how reporting both worked and didn't work.
Right.
You saw it with yourself. So when you're thinking about recognizing spiritual abuse, because at the end of the day, that's where all of this started. It became other forms of abuse with you and others. But it started always from a spiritual place. It started as I'm the head of the household. God's called me to do this, right? It started in a spiritual place with those young women.
Right.
It started in a spiritual place with the board. And oftentimes if spiritual abuse is left unchecked, it will become other kinds of abuse and it will become criminal. Okay, look, spiritual abuse isn't criminal. So pastors, if you'll own up to it, if we'll learn when we make mistakes, you can stay, you can learn, you can grow, but if we don't deal with it, it will become other things. It'll become things that you didn't think you would do, right? But when you think about that spiritual abuse and how the spiritual abuse, narcissistic behavior kind of started always from a spiritual side, it was present in the church world, it was present with him as a pastor, it was present with him as a husband. When you think about it, like, what did you learn? What did you learn about spiritual abuse, about narcissism? What did you learn through this process now that you're looking back?
Number one, pastors are truly people. And if you don't view them as a person and expect, I feel like a lot of people go, oh, they're a pastor, and if you've been in fundamentalist circles, it's like, oh, he's up on a pedestal a little bit.
He's a man of God.
He's a man of God.
He's the man of God.
He's godly. He's whatever. And it can't be that way. He is also a person. You can't hold him to a lower standard.
Yeah.
You have to hold him to a higher standard because he's a pastor.
Every human being is capable of being holy,
right?
But every human being is also capable of heinous injustice, right?
Right.
So a higher standard doesn't mean that we don't listen to an accusation because they're a pastor. A higher standard means we check every accusation because
Right.
they're supposed to be above reproach.
And he should want that.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
absolutely.
He should want that for his own protection.
When you don't have anything to hide, absolutely
Right.
investigate it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I would also say if you're a spouse or a pastor's wife dealing with something like this, because there are egregious people doing these things still today, to start to reach out for help. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, so that you can get your brain around what's really going on in your life and how you want to deal with that, how you can get help.
Yeah.
And not do it alone.
So it sounds like one of the first things like that you really pushed on is, hey, if we would see pastors as people first, then one, we would listen to these accusations, and two, we would be able to hold them to that standard the Bible gives us of being above reproach, not perfect, but just above reproach,
Right.
which means doing the right things. That'd be the first thing that we could do. Are there any other things that you can think of, like, that we can do in churches? It's much harder to make a change in a relationship.
Right.
But are there any other things you can see that we could do in churches that would help mitigate this behavior before it gets that bad?
I would actually say don't attend any church that doesn't have a strong accountability structure. I'm not saying any. I would say if the church is out on its own and it is a wild card, it's just waiting for a narcissist to show up and take over, because that's what they like. They want to be a big fish in a small pond. It doesn't matter how small or crazy the pond is. They want to be the big fish.
Yeah.
And so if there's no accountability structures, that's a huge red flag. I would never even attend a church that doesn't have massive structures.
I think it's important to ask questions too, because you can have a really good accountability structure on paper.
Yeah.
And then it turned out to not be
This
real.
is true. This is true because he snuck into this whole organization that hadn't even vetted him, and they're putting their stamp of approval on him, and they didn't even know.
Well, and it's just like, I'll use our story again because it's a good example, but we have heard stories like this time and time and time again.
Right.
But you go through the process, you try to report this only to realize that the elder board that you thought could do something actually has no authority, no teeth. Or for a lot of non-denominational churches today, the board is actually made up of other pastors from outside your community, outside your church. They're like absentee landlords. They don't know what's going on.
Right.
They only know the person they're already friends with who put them on this board.
Right.
Right. So when we talk about accountability structures,
That's
they need to be
interesting.
real, not just on paper.
Right.
And they need to be people. There need to be people there who can actually call the pastor out on these things. I love the church that we go to right now. It's a mixture of, you have elders from inside the church who have pastoral responsibility even as lay leaders.
Okay.
Right. But you also have elders from outside the church, but they're all local pastors and former pastors. So they're still here. They get that pastoral side, right? But there's a mix of those things. And even outside of reporting, I can't remember if it's every year or every 2 years, it actually comes up where, every single elder is vetted for how good of a job have you been doing? Is there any concerns? And you have to be above reproach. So, I know the pastor, I love him to death, and he says they can get rid of me at any time if I am not being a good elder.
Yeah.
But that doesn't exist in a lot of places. So ask questions about the accountability structure. Find out how is your pastor held accountable? What does that look like? What areas can the board hold them accountable? Can they be proactive? If we ask questions, we'd find out, one, a lot of our accountability structures in churches aren't as good as we think. They can be made good with some small changes, but if we don't ask questions, we don't know that.
Mm-hmm. What would you say? I'm curious what you would say as a pastor. Let's say it's not as egregious as my situation where he's, I'm thinking he's getting ready to kill me, or he throws a chair at me or whatever. Let's say
most
it's not,
situations aren't going to be that egregious. That's wild.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. That's not normal.
Yeah, it is not normal. But okay, so let's say something is going on in a marriage where the pastor's wife does feel isolated. She does need help. What do you say as a pastor? Where does she go with that?
She should.
What are the recommendations?
Yeah. There should be a mediator, there should be a third party, or there should be someone who has proven they can handle the position in the church that anyone
already
can
set
go to.
up.
Yes, that anyone can go to with any concern.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So for a lot of churches, what that looks like is you have a mediator on retainer. Okay. And if there is any concern, everybody knows the number, or everybody knows the process to fill out the form or whatever, and that mediator gets back with you. Nobody at the church even finds out what's going on until you've first spoken with that mediator. Then the mediator can say, hey, we heard this concern. We wanted to bring it to you, find out your response. And the mediator's job is then to actually move that forward to an investigation or not. That can go back to the board. It can go back to a committee, but there's got to be a lot of people involved in this.
Right.
No matter what it is, though, how big or how small, there's always got to be a safe place to report. I saw something, I've experienced something, and I'm just not sure that it's right.
And so a lot of churches has therapists on site or life coaches on site. Yep. You would say that is not the right person for a reporting of a pastor's wife.
No,
saying,
not at all.
My husband is not who he says he is at church.
No, it can be helpful for them. So my wife was, she was a therapist at a church for a long time.
Yeah.
Right. One, if it's not criminal, if they are not endangering their life or someone else's directly.
Right.
Okay. Then what is told to the therapist can't actually be reported without a bunch of paperwork and stuff anyway. Okay. So a victim's not normally going to sign off on all that. Okay. And therapists are not going to share that. If it is that level of danger, they have to share it no matter what.
Right.
Right. But I think there's got to be a place that, again, is just neutral. It's a place that you report to. The pastor should never have a role, neither should anybody on the board, of choosing who that is. So when it gets renewed,
that's the problem of a narcissist pastor, though. They usually want to have their hands.
Exactly. So you got to have a policy where whoever we're using as a mediator, we need to check that at least every 2 years, right? Yeah. But when we check that needs to be like a congregational vote or a full staff vote. It needs to be something to where people outside of the pastor and the board have some say in this. So you're being paid by tithe money, but there's no one who has influence to hold that over you of, hey, you say it wasn't that big of a deal, or you hide this and then you get a kickback, right?
Right.
It's got to really be a neutral engagement from the beginning.
Truly neutral.
Yes. Yeah. And there's a lot of different ways that you can try to do that. There's got to be checks and balances. And that's where part of what we're doing with the nonprofit that we're starting, the Spiritual Abuse Institute, is we're coming in when people set up those processes. We come in and do annual assessments with churches that want to be on our Church Safe certified list.
Yeah.
So Church Safe certified
amazing.
list where we can say, hey, in your area, let's find some church safe churches. They're not going to be perfect. Bad things can happen there. But our goal is to say, hey, they have removed all the red flags possible, and they have policies and procedures that we vet on a regular basis to make sure that people are safe, or that you can be safe. So part of what we would look at is we would look at the relationships with that mediator every year when we come in and make sure that no one could influence their decisions, if that process needs to be changed at all, because again, we're completely third party.
Right.
We don't get paid by the church. The church can make a donation to us if they'd like, but we're going to be paid by donors. So if we come in and say stuff the church doesn't like and piss them off, it doesn't change what we're doing.
Right.
Okay. Because if you don't like it, then just don't give a donation back to us. But we're doing this anyway for the safety of people. And then we can come back to our donors and say, hey, we've had multiple churches that didn't like what we said this year, and we've got a shortfall of $10,000. Will you guys take care of it, right? And again, that's scary. It'd be easier to charge the churches, but if we're charging the churches, then we're beholden to the churches, right? And we can't do that. Yeah. So I think that's what I would say. There always has to be a clear reporting structure, and that reporting has to go to someone who is neutral. Yeah. So for you, when you're looking back at this, there's no certain number, but what are the biggest red flags of a narcissistic pastor that you've seen?
His actions, I can look back and see that his actions were telling me who he was. He was always a bully. So I knew him in elementary school. I knew him in high school. I knew him in junior high. He was always a bully. Mm-hmm. And he would make a joke about it and how much he had changed once he became a Christian. But then I could still see bullying behaviors, but it wasn't directed at me. But he was still showing me who he was.
I wish you'd listened to that.
Yeah. Immediately when we started dating, there was huge control, but it wasn't far off the fundamentalist background that I grew up in that was very pharisaical about what music do you listen to? You can't wear sleeveless. You got to wear sleeves. You have to wear a dress. And he was very controlling about that. Yeah. Those are the things that just like you would if you were going into a relationship, I would have, those are the things that became the problem in the marriage, in the church, in the relationship. And I would have believed those.
Yeah. Well, for anybody who's out there dating, doesn't matter whether you're an adult who's dating or whether you're a young adult, teenager, whatever. If they're controlling in the dating relationship, you don't want to marry them,
right?
Because no one should be controlling in a dating relationship. You have no responsibility to me,
right?
We're checking this out. We're seeing how this works. So people are going to be on their best behavior when they're dating. So that would be good for if you're dating someone called the ministry, you're dating anyone. If there's control issues during dating, it's only going to get worse.
Right.
But if you're thinking outside the relationship and you're thinking, are there any red flags you saw that you would say, you know what, this would work for people? They could see these same red flags, even if they're just checking out churches or deciding, should I work at this church, right? Are there any red flags that you want to share with the audience that you say, whether it's a relationship or a church, if you see this red flag, you need to check into it more. Don't ignore it.
You know what? The biggest red flag is trust your gut. If something feels off, even though maybe you can't verbalize it, your whole body is taking in information, your senses are taking in information. And if you feel like there is something wrong, I guarantee that there is something wrong. And you can feel it in your body.
Yeah, so don't just dismiss it. Don't just dismiss what you're feeling.
Don't just dismiss it. Maybe explore it. Maybe it's something, who knows what it is. I'm just assuming that something bad is going on, but just explore and find out what is wrong if you still feel like you want to stay there. So
even if you're not sure, that doesn't mean that your gut's always right.
Right.
But it means if you've got a bad feeling, it's always worth trusting your gut enough to at least ask questions.
Yeah.
To not feel bad for asking questions.
Yes.
Right. Any other red flags that stick out to you?
I can't think of anything now that we're
kind of silencing, maybe, like always silencing your opinions, and even in a church,
Yeah, now that you say that, there were so many ways that he poked holes in me where I wasn't realizing it, and he was disguising it as, I'm doing you a favor. I'm the one who cares the most about you, but that outfit looks terrible on you. I wouldn't wear that. And I'm going to girlfriends and they're like, that outfit looks amazing on you. He doesn't want you to look good because he doesn't want you to look good. He doesn't want you to grow your hair long because you look like a school marm when you're, because he didn't like he thought I looked worse with short hair.
Yeah.
And
that's silencing
weird
control.
Things, poking holes constantly.
So silencing, control, always having to be right and poking holes in what you think, what you believe.
Yep.
I've seen that happen on church staffs as well, where it's like, hey, no matter how good the idea is from a staff member, there's always something wrong with it.
Yeah.
Even though that person who's telling you what's wrong with it will take the idea and present it as their own. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. So one of the last questions I want to ask, and I know we need to go today, and hopefully just for people who have heard your story for the first time, they can see their own red flags. They can pull their own red flags out of this. Sometimes it's hard to come up with those. it's important for us to do the work. So sometimes I ask a lot of guests about those red flags, and sometimes we'll rattle them off.
Yeah.
Other times it's harder to see, but from everyone's story, there's something that we can learn, right? But I really want to speak to, and again, this isn't just relationships. This could be you feel like you're potentially in an abusive relationship, but it could also be, I feel like I'm in an abusive church, or I could be. If you feel like that and you think it's time to leave, maybe you're not even completely right, but you feel like it's time to leave, what advice would you give to someone to leave safely? Because there's dangers in leaving that church. There's dangers in leaving that relationship. What advice would you give them on one front or both to leave safely and protect themselves?
One of the big things that I realized, we were talking about this morning, is that in my life in general, I was taught very unsafe behaviors with relationships. So I was kind of, and the minute I would meet you, my heart was wide open. I would have, let you borrow my car. I would have believed you're the best person until you start showing me something different. My heart was wide open. And I've learned since then through therapy that's a very typical thing for people who have trauma, is just to open your heart wide and your life wide and have it be a bleeding heart, help all these people. And I'm not saying don't help people, but I'm saying have safe people in your life. Because at one point I looked back and I realized, oh my gosh, all the people I have in my life are hurting me. All of them. My friends. I have work relationships, and the people that I'm close with, they're all hurting me in some way. And I started to ask myself, why is that? And I realized because I was surrounding myself with all these people who were not caring about me, who I cared about deeply, who just were all unsafe people. And they were just not, you have to recognize what people are giving you in relationships and which relationships you need to step toward and which relationships to step back. There's a lot of safe people out there. There's a lot of unsafe people out there. And so you just start being more discerning about what type of people you want in your life. And that made, for me, all the difference in the world. Now I have a great support group of friends who I could go to, talk to about any problem, marriage problem, family problem, finances, and they believe the best about me. They're not going to cut me down. I'm not going to hear about it later. They're not going to make me look bad. They really care about me and are willing to draw close and care about me as much as I care about them.
And not only are they safe, but they're willing to call you on it when you're wrong.
Yeah.
But because they are a safe place for you to go, you'll listen to that.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's huge. Maybe you feel like you have those safe people. Maybe you don't feel like you have those safe people, because Joyce, you've been in kind of both situations. But if you think you're in an unhealthy or unsafe relationship, or you think you're in an unhealthy, unsafe, or just could be harmful church, right? For either one, I would say one of the first things you need to do is go to someone you trust who is disconnected from that relationship or is disconnected from that church. So I tell people often, if you think you're in an abusive church situation, one of the best places to go to a friend who's disconnected from that church, tell them what's going on and just say, hey, is it just me? Is this normal? Is this okay? Because someone outside that church is going to say, that's not normal.
Right.
Versus someone inside that system would say,
this is not right.
No, this is okay. Right. And if you don't have that person, go see a therapist. Right. And I remember that was one of the things that was very helpful for me. Before I realized I was experiencing spiritual abuse, I had a therapist who was calling it out, and they were kind of helping me to see it. I was fighting on it and going, no, I think those are good things. Those are good things. Those are good things. And he was like, no, Jeff, these aren't normal.
Right.
These things aren't normal. So that when I finally realized it was happening, it was, oh, I've got a safe place to go. And I've already had someone who was saying these things aren't normal. Right. Tell me navigate that. So if you find yourself in a situation like that, find someone who is safe, who is not connected to the church, not connected to the relationship that you can go talk to. If you don't have that person, go talk to a therapist. Legally, they're not going to report anything that doesn't put you in immediate danger, but they're going to help you to process what's okay here, what's not. But I think one of the things we can learn from your story, Joyce, is trust your gut, go to that safe person early, because the longer you stay in an unhealthy environment, the harder it is to get out. Right. The longer you stay in an unhealthy relationship, the harder it is to get out. But Before we go, because I know our time's run to an end.
Yeah.
Today, a big part of your ministry is you're actually helping women to walk in fullness. You're helping women to escape these situations. You really just have a heart for women not experiencing what you've experienced. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about that, if we have any women that want to connect with you, and what the best way is for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so I've become a life coach because of my life experiences that all led me that direction. And I support women who are in crisis. And my ideal client is a pastor's wife who is in crisis, partly because, obviously, my background.
That doesn't mean that they have an abusive husband. They can just be in crisis because ministry has a lot of demands.
And a lot of times, sometimes it can be crisis because, oh my gosh, now you're an empty nester and you weren't preparing for this, and it's left you at a place where you just don't know what to do and don't know how to deal with it, don't know what you want next, and you're trying to find your next step in life. And so I do that as a living. I'm a life coach, and they can reach me through the notes at the bottom of this podcast.
Yeah, so we'll just go ahead, we'll link website, stuff like that. You'll send it to me, we'll link it in the description.
Yeah.
So go ahead, check the description, whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, doesn't matter. Go in the description and it'll be right there. But if you are, a woman who's in any sort of crisis, especially if you're a pastor's wife, Joyce would be a phenomenal help to you. And she's someone who's been through it. She's been through crisis. She's come out the other side. Joyce, I know this is tough stuff to talk about. It's got to be scary. Thank you so much for your vulnerability today and for your courage to share this story with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for hosting me and let me share my story. And my hope is that someone else who's experiencing something that they heard today will just take the next step, reach out to someone, do the next thing that they know to do to get help and to get to a safe spot.
Yeah. And these are tough conversations to have. Like we said at the beginning, this can be a triggering conversation.
Yes.
So you may be asking, Jeff, why do you guys have these conversations? This is just a reminder. We have these tough conversations on this podcast because the more we have these conversations, the easier it is to recognize abusive leaders. And the more we have these conversations, the harder it becomes for abusive and narcissistic leaders to stay in the church. And leaders like your ex-husband, leaders like this, they have no place in the church. They are wolves in the sheep pen. They're wolves in sheep's clothing. So by having these conversations, we not only show them for who they are, we not only make it harder for them to stay, but we also we're able to actually see the beauty of really good and healthy pastors. So look, we need to celebrate good and healthy pastors. We need more of the men and women who truly care, who are truly servants, who are truly shepherds. And we need less narcissists who are looking for control. So as hard as these conversations are to have, every time we have them, I think we shine a little bit brighter of a light in the dark, and it's getting to be a harder place. We want to have enough of these conversations where the church is a really hard place for narcissists to hide.
Right. Great. That's what we need.
Yeah. Awesome. So again, Joyce, thank you so much. We're praying for you. We're so grateful that you have not only a story to tell, but on the other side, you have a life worth celebrating. Right now. So, guys, we're praying for you, no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're dealing with right now, even if you're in the middle of those waves of grief, you're not alone. We're with you. We're here to support you. And we'll see you on the next episode of Church Disrupted.